Should Gensler, though, testify before Congress? Is there some type of regulation?
Know that you're breaking the rules, but we'll look the other way. If these reports are true, we could be looking at genuine corruption within the US government.
On what you think about the co-founder, Gary Wang, and former CEO of Alameda Research, Caroline Ellison. They both pled guilty, and presumably they're flipping on Sam Bankman-Fried here. That's going to help make the government's case stronger. Your thoughts on how all of this plays out behind the scenes, because you know the intricacies of that and that negotiation that takes place.
Well, I think there's two very interesting things about it. One is just a normal thing when you get somebody who's an alleged accomplice to plead guilty, which is the government has gotten them to plead guilty to the same conspiracy charges that Sam Bankman-Fried is charged with. So if you're Bankman-Fried and you're thinking about going to trial, it becomes very difficult to get acquitted when people are going to take the stand and say they committed the crime that you're charged with and they committed it with you.
Right.
You know, it's not something that people do. And then the other thing I think that's interesting is, I think we may have talked about this last week. You know, there's in the law, there's some question about whether cryptocurrency is really a security for purposes of the securities laws and whether it's a commodity for purposes of that set of laws. I thought it was very interesting that they made both of the cooperators, Ellison and Wang, plead guilty to the securities conspiracy charge and the commodities conspiracy charge.
Both of them. Because
they are trying to, they're trying to lay the groundwork that there's no dispute here whatsoever that the government has the ability under the current laws that exist to regulate here.
Understood.
Now, that's not binding on Sam Bankman-Fried. If he wants to go to trial and he wants to challenge the legality, completely regulate cryptocurrency.
I got it.
Of that. He can. Their guilty plea doesn't dispose of the issue as to him, but it's clear that they're trying to lay the groundwork that the current set of laws that we have.
I'll ask you about the border, but just one more question about this. He didn't enter a plea, so presumably now is the time that the government is going to be negotiating with his attorneys, and he gets to decide, does he plead guilty to a certain amount of charges? Maybe they can, you know, get him a little bit of a better deal than what he's being faced with now, or does he go to trial, which is very risky by all accounts. I've spoken to a lot of defense attorneys who say you never know what you're going to get at trial because it's all up to the jury.
You know, the thing, Jackie, is if you mentioned the Bernie Madoff case and Connell did. Bernie Madoff got 150 years, you know, and the only reason I point that out is at a certain point, if they're not willing to do more than, you know, give you a break like 10 years or 15 years, if, you know, the break is you're looking at 30 or 40, even if the chance of success is unlikely, a lot of people say we might as well roll the dice and go to trial because otherwise my life is over.
Right.
So, you know, that's what he's going to be confronted with. I guess if he gets in early and he agrees like the other two accomplices have agreed to dispose of the civil cases brought by the SEC and the Commodities Exchange Commission, you know, maybe that helps him, but it's a lot of money at stake, and the sentence.
Caroline's dad, Glenn Ellison, both worked at MIT as professors. At MIT, Caroline's dad was the former boss of the head of the SEC. An alleged leaked email shows that the SEC was going to give FTX, quote, no action relief. Basically, this means, we know that you're breaking the rules, but we'll look the other way. If these reports are true, we could be looking at genuine corruption within the US government.
You better come forward now we're happy to cooperate with you, but we're coming after you. We're going to get you. Now is your best chance. So I think what we're going to likely see is a bunch of other players coming out of the woodwork, a bunch of other charges being filed, and not just by the U.S. Attorney's Office, but by the CFTC as well as the SEC as well.
Kudos for the DOJ, the STNY, getting cooperating witnesses and moving at lightning speed. But as you know, a lot of fingers have been pointed at the SEC, including by Congressman Tom Emmer. He says Gary Gensler must testify before Congress. He tweeted that FTX's collapse is not a crypto failure. It's a CFI Gary Gensler SBF situation. How responsible is Gary Gensler for, as some would say, being asleep at the wheel during all of this?
Yeah, it's sort of ironic that Representative Emmer is blaming the SEC when earlier this year, if you remember, Emmer was the lead signatory on a letter by several congressmen to the SEC, yelling at them essentially for exceeding their mandate by, among other things, seeking information from FTX. Emmer is the co-chair, I believe, of what's known as the Blockchain Caucus, and he has been very vocal that government should leave crypto, should leave the digital asset space alone, and let entrepreneurship and let innovation thrive without the, as he would put it, regulatory touch of regulation. So it is somewhat opportunistic for Emmer, who has been calling for the SEC to step back, to now come forward and say, oh, no, the problem is the SEC hasn't been aggressive enough.
That's fair. Should Gensler, though, testify before Congress, is there some type of regulation that could have prevented this?
Yeah, no, look, I think that there has been long a call for regulation of the crypto space, and there's, even in the face of efforts by those such as Emmer to pull back on government regulation, and it's not just an SEC issue. I mean, as you know, I'm sure, the SEC has been going after crypto assets. It has put forth several very aggressive lawsuits arguing that certain assets like Ripple, like LBRY, are in fact securities and have to be regulated. But it's not just an SEC issue. It's also a banking issue. There's now a question, given what we've seen with FTX, with Celsius, with other exchanges, there is an issue as to how crypto assets of customers are to be treated at an exchange. Should they be segregated? Should they be insured? Should there be something like some kind of depository scheme like we have for normal banking? Do we need a kind of Glass-Steagall for crypto, where customer-facing operations have to be completely divorced from proprietary trading? I think if we had something like that in effect, we probably wouldn't have seen the scope of the scandal that we're seeing at FTX.
We've been talking about a lot about the SEC, but there's also the CFTC, the Commodity Futures Trading Commission. In fact, two former commissioners made it onto the FTX board, Mark Wetjen and also Jill Summers. And I haven't seen as much written about the CFTC influence on FTX. And in fact, Sam Bankman-Fried was lobbying the CFTC to allow derivatives trading to, I guess, new futures instruments to be traded by FTX. And I got to say, I'm glad these didn't come to fruition here, because that could have been an absolute nightmare. I'm just wondering what the CFTC's complicity in this is, if you see any.
I don't think complicity is the right word here, but you do point to an important issue.